This session really is aiming at addressing issues of funding. How do we ensure that all of these great initiatives that you've heard of, these great initiatives that are on display, how are they funded? Who funds them? And who should fund those initiatives going forward? So I just have a 4-slide presentation just to set the scene. It is also a reflection of South Africa's contribution towards SANBio. My fellow colleagues from Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and the Seychelles are only 5 with myself of the 13 members from SANBio. So jointly we'll discuss the issue of domestic resource mobilization in SANBio member states. Next slide, please. So South Africa, through the Department of Science and Technology, has been a funder of SANBio since its inception in 2005. And to date, the total contribution that have been made to SANBio exceeds 30 million South African rands. Initially, the project was funded by the Canadian International Development Agency and by OFISA, the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Currently, for the financial year 2014-17, the funding was as high as 12.5 million for the 3 years and as high as 16 million into the 3-year cycle going forward. Just to give an illustration, for 1 year's support to SANBio, it totals 9.9 million for this year that's ending in March. And 59.4% of that is DST funded. The balance comes from the Finnish ministry through the funded projects, and some of it comes from the member states as co-funding for projects. But as you can see, this is not a sustainable model. If the Finnish ministry were to leave the country or cease funding SANBio, how would we pay for the balance? How would we continue supporting all of these initiatives and projects? This is just a rough illustration of the funding that has been provided by DST over the years. And as you can see, it's going up. It's increasing from every 3-year cycle. But we need to find a model that works. And Dr. Chakaonya would know that every year we meet with him, the discussion is how much of the total budget of SANBio comes from member states and other external donors. So that's the issue that we'll be debating this afternoon. Now the question is, why would DST put so much money to support SANBio? I think it's very clear that SANBio's activities very much align to a number of national strategies and policies. As mentioned earlier by some of my colleagues, it aligns to the National Bioeconomy Strategy, the National Development Plan, the 10-year Innovation Plan, and even at the regional level. Colleagues would be aware that South Africa this year chairs SADC, and it's very important that we contribute and support SADC initiatives so that we can create this regional innovation chain within the region. So we support, through the funding, the SADC industrialization strategy, SADC STI strategy, the SADC food nutrition and sustainable agriculture strategy, among others. And of course, at the continental level, the STI strategy for Africa, what we call STISA 2024, also speak to supporting innovation and entrepreneurs, and hence our continued investments. And of course, all of the thematic areas under SANBio contribute one way or the other towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So it makes sense that at national level, we continue to fund the SANBio activities. Some of the funding that's contributed from DST goes towards supporting the Secretariat, which is hosted at the CSIR, and in turn, the CSIR also supports some of the administrative costs of hosting SANBio, such as office space, HR and finance systems, and so on. The funding also goes towards supporting SANBio flagship projects, strengthening the network, implementation of the SANBio business plan, and operationalizing the activities of the Secretariat. And also setting up SANBio governance structures such as the steering committee and so forth. So in short, from the South African side, SANBio is really a strategic initiative that requires all of the member states' contribution and support. So with me on the panel, we have the 4 gentlemen and 1 lady who will speak a little bit on their resource mobilization strategies or initiatives at a country level to support SANBio. We will give them each 4 minutes to make their interventions. Some will speak from the floor. One will speak from the podium through a presentation, and thereafter we'll get into a discussion on how should SANBio be funded, who should support the activities of SANBio, if not through member states. So first up, I'd like to call Dr. Martin Kivakile from the National Food Technology Research Center of Botswana to just say a few words about domestic resource mobilization from Botswana. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'll be very brief. Firstly, I have to indicate that in Botswana, we are basically at the formative stages of our RSTI landscape. We adopted a revised RSTI policy in 2013. And as we speak now, we are still trying to put in place the systems that are supposed to run under that RSTI, including the funding mechanisms. The way we are currently operating as research institutions, universities, is that we operate under different ministries. And on an annual basis, we request for funding to run our affairs from these different ministries. And therefore, it depends on how well you present your case to that particular ministry. Like, for example, in my case, National Food Technology Research Center, I get a budget which comes in 2 forms. There's a budget that I use for recurrent expenses, salaries, electricity, running costs basically, and then a development budget, which basically I use to try and put in place facilities that we use for our research. And at the same time, we use that same budget to run our projects. So what we've been trying to do basically is that from this development budget, we try and stretch it by looking for partnerships. For example, we've got a number of projects that we are running with SANBio, where we pledge the contribution that we can put into a project as our contribution. And by so doing, we do get some funding from SANBio to carry on with the project. We do the same with the International Atomic Energy Agency and a number of other forms of sponsorships that we get to do that. But that is just a temporary coping mechanism that we are using. Currently, we are looking into creating the necessary structures that will run our RSTI policy. Just recently, we launched our innovation, the Botswana Innovation Fund, which basically is looking into promoting innovation through adoption of technologies, research, and technology in the private sector. So here is where the private sector has got the way, private sector and the organizations, to apply for funding to work on specific projects. And they can subcontract universities and research organizations to work with them on those specific technologies or innovations that are looking into. And this is competitive, whereby we believe it will assist us to be able to twin with other funding agencies to be able to do the kind of research or innovations that we are looking into. We piloted this before we launched this particular fund, whereby the Botswana Innovation Hub, which is overlooking or overrunning this particular fund, pledged about 1 million pula to SANBio. And SANBio matched that with another million rands, whereby bids were submitted. A call was put up to focus on IKS. And this was IKS which was relevant to Botswana. And we had quite a number of applications coming through. About 3 of them were selected, and they were funded. And as we are talking right now, we've got some of the products which are in here. We believe that through the recently established Innovation Fund, we should be having more of these kind of twinnings taking place, and in actual fact, trying to push the kind of innovations that we are looking into. Just about 2 weeks back, we launched a committee. The minister launched a committee which is now going to be running this fund. And as I said, we are still at the formative stages, and therefore we don't have yet processes and the proper schemes that will be implemented to run this particular fund. This committee is responsible for coming up with those. But looking at our history, in my view, I think the future is bright, because we are getting a lot of support from our government. We don't have a very strong industry base, because occasionally you do get a lot of funding from the industry. But we have a lot of support from government. And we believe that where we are starting, we should be able to really move forward with the kind of initiatives that we are thinking of under SANBio and BioFees.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kivakile. I think that's very encouraging from Botswana to hear that you now have an innovation fund that you can use to fund some of these projects, that you're also receiving a lot of support from government, but you raise an important point also around private sector co-funding. And that's perhaps an issue that we need to debate a little bit. How do we also bring in the private sector to help support the commercialization of all of these initiatives from SANBio? Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. So now we move to our colleague from Zimbabwe, from the National Biotech Authority, Dr. Jonathan Mutandayenza. I hope I got that right. Over to you,
see
sir.
you're struggling with my surname. It's normal. It's Mfandayenza Jonathan. Well, thank you for giving me the platform to say a few words on our landscape for resource mobilization. Let me start by saying that we have recently launched a node for Zimbabwe, the biotechnology node, which coordinates different sectors which fall under biotech. This was motivated by the fact that we received quite a number of SANBio grants. Our researchers were quite upfront in terms of producing applications, and through the adjudication processes, they managed to get the seed grants from SANBio. We're quite happy about that development. So we have got several sub-nodes under our own arrangements, some focusing on genomics, human health, food and nutrition, agro-processing, and so on. So these sub-nodes have their own technical working groups, which bring in quite a lot of valuable information and expertise to guide them through for resource mobilization and so on. But more importantly, we encourage whatever project, whatever activity, to be part of the national priority area, research area, which is set by the Research Council of Zimbabwe. The reason being that if your project is aligned to the research priorities of the country, Then through the Research Council of Zimbabwe, which is gunning for a 1% of the GDP towards research, then that will help to sustain projects that seek to address national priority areas. And from our side, from the National Biotechnology Authority of Zimbabwe, as a trajectory, we are also setting a statutory fund called the Biotech Fund, whose purpose is to identify, prioritize researchers and technology development doing research which answers national problems, and this will definitely be funded, supported through the fund. Then thirdly, we also encourage our researchers, entrepreneurs to form collaborations. Definitely, you can't survive in this world without the extra legs and arms. So collaborating with other institutions definitely will bring the necessary leverage for survival. We've got quite a number of our sub-nodes which have formed linkages with other internationally recognized funding platforms. We've got ABIST, African Institute of Biomedical Science Technology. They've formed quite some healthy relationship with other international funders. Also, I can flag that we've got a research program done at Chinhoyi University of Technology. I think Professor Ivan would give a presentation. I think the university is also giving some in-kind contribution of about 20% towards supporting some of their efforts. But not to say that these are the only available channels, but there are always other channels to augment the resources and so on. But I want to emphasize that for nodes, that why don't we take a cue from SANBio, where they have got a business plan as a funding document that they will use to request or to source for extra funding. I think in Zimbabwe, this is the route which we are going to take our node business plan as a funding document through which we can then approach other relevant funding authorities to say, look, we have a business plan. Come on the table, let's discuss, let's locate each other, and let's move together. I think this is, in a way, to sustain whatever project proposal which we are putting on the table through our notes, so that these are sustainable. But lastly, Madam Chair, I want to indicate that the purpose of SANBio projects is to commercialize. And we urge our nodes to quickly get into that mode, commercialize your products, and definitely, if they are good products, they should fetch the real value of their worthiness from the market in terms of the dollars and cents. So this is an encouragement we would definitely put on our notes so that they continue to exist way past the SANBio funding mode. With these few remarks, I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think what I like about what is being said by the colleagues here is that we all serve in the SANBio Steering Committee. So all of these proclamations and suggestions that we are making today, we will take up to discuss on Thursday when we have our SANBio Steering Committee. I like the idea of the nodes having business plans that they can use to mobilize resources. You also spoke about collaborations, not just within the region, but outside of the regions as well. And that's something perhaps that we can discuss in more detail at the steering committee. Thank you very much for those inputs. We move now to Mr. John Chongo from the Ministry of Higher Education in Zambia. Over to you, sir. You have a presentation?
Yeah, there is a small presentation.
Is it ready?
Yes, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to just give you a few highlights, not necessarily a presentation like on a PowerPoint, just a small write-up or about a page. This is just to give some highlights on the funding initiatives which supports science, technology, and innovation, not necessarily to highlight as biosciences. Though, of course, biosciences is a critical area of science and technology, which, as I present, you will notice that most of the projects which are funded have been under biosciences. Okay, that's my name. I'm coming from Department of Science and Technology and the Ministry of Higher Education in Zambia. In Zambia, under my department, we noticed that in most research institutions and universities, we were not observing, or we never used to see projects that are of strategic importance or projects that addresses national priorities coming out. So the ministry decided to come up with these 3 funds, which we are trying to ensure that scientists, somehow they target their projects or research towards answering to national priority areas. So we came up with, the first fund I will highlight is what we call a Strategic Research Fund. This is a fund which we coordinate as a ministry, but it is being run by a National Science and Technology Council. It's an agency like National Research Fund for South Africa in that case. So this fund, every year we provide funding. And actually I really thank the government. They have shown much interest to continually increase this funding. And I know to some nations it might look to be a small figure. Like for 2018 specifically, there's an allocation of about $1 million US. And this is just an allocation which goes towards this fund. And out of this fund, we support some projects which are still running. As you can see, so far we have actually supported 56 projects under this fund. And one of the projects which I will highlight is the SF 2000, the Sondage Formula 2000, which SANBio also highlighted as a flagship, and they have been helping to develop this project until it reached commercialization stage. Even as a country, we have continued to support this project, and more attention is still given to these projects. All in all, under this fund, I've highlighted about 21 projects under biosciences has been supported, just direct from this fund. And again, we noticed another element is the issue of projects which come from the youths. We know the youths as young as maybe at secondary school, most of them they are innovating. So we decided to come up with a fund which we call the Science and Technology Innovation Youth Fund. And this fund, it is also run by the National Science and Technology Council. And this fund specifically is just to promote and develop those projects coming from the youths. And someone might ask, how are the youths going, how are they developing these projects? What we do, we affiliate these youths to university lecturers who somehow act as mentors, so that they help to develop these projects. And so far, since it's a formulation or inception in 2007, we have supported about 22 projects. And actually, the fund was small, and now it has increased. For this year, we are giving it $300,000 US. And also, looking at the level of commercialization, which has been quite a challenge, I know, in most countries, including Zambia. We also decided to come up with the Technology Business Development Fund. This fund is run by our institution, which we call the National Technology Business Center. Okay, this is an institution which is like TIA of South Africa, So we give them this fund every year. Like for this year, we have given them about 340,000 US dollars. And we expect them to identify projects, scientific projects, which includes all areas, including biosciences. Or what we look for is those projects should address the national priority areas. So we, since inception, of course, under commercialization, we have noticed very few projects have been picked. If you can see, when we started this fund in 2009, so far we can highlight about 5 projects have been going under development, of which there's just one project which I will highlight, which has somehow reached an advanced stage, which maybe a few of you might have heard of it. We have a fertilizer applicator, which was developed by an innovator from Zambia, and that has received much support of all the other projects. But other projects are still, undergoing some development. But to reach the market, I think that's the challenge which most of the projects are facing. For instance, though it's not in biosciences, but there was a project which I will just highlight, since I'll take this privilege coming from government, and looking as government, I go beyond biosciences. I know a good number of us here, we're under biosciences. But we had a project which someone came up with on local welding rods. Someone developed local welding rods, and it started very well, and our intention was to see how those can penetrate the mining sector, knowing that in Zambia there's a lot of mining. But that innovation actually it has faced a number of challenges due to external competition, like coming from China. So I've seen the cost, despite it being manufactured within the country, the cost is higher than what is coming from other countries, for China, for instance. So I think these are the funds which I'm highlighting, which government has come up with. But on the mind of government is, as much as all these funds are coming, government wants to see how, as scientists, we can use government funding to address national priorities, which will reach the local people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chongo. I think the question that we might need to ask ourselves as we get into the discussion later, as most of the member states that are here also are part of other initiatives like the SAIS initiative, SANBio, but also part of bilateral engagements. How do you also make sure that we capitalize on all of those investments as member states in SANBio, but also members in other regional and bilateral projects? But that's a question for a discussion later. So without further ado, I'd like to call Ms. Tessa Belle from the National Institute of Science, Technology and Innovation from the Seychelles. Let's welcome her with a round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be presenting on behalf of Seychelles. I believe it's the smallest country represented here today. I have a presentation. It's not up? Yeah. So, do you have a notice? Yeah, I gave it to them already. Yeah. What's the name? It's under Tessa. Under Tessa. Yeah. Sorry about that.
So perhaps while we wait for the presentation to be loaded, we can perhaps get a sense by showing your hands, questions from the floor. with regards to domestic resource mobilization. I know we press for time, so I'd like to squeeze in as many questions as possible now. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, I see a hand here. Sorry, ma'am, for that. Please say who you are, where you come from, and then you can state your question.
My name is Colette Dandara. I'm from University of Cape Town. I just want to ask our presenters to really, we're looking at an initiative, SANBio, that we want to see its future. To indicate, I know they are very interesting projects that they are doing on the sidelines. How much are they putting towards the program to be sustainable? To say like DST is putting so much into the program, Botswana is putting so much, or this and this country will put so much, so that we see whether we're going anywhere or whether we're not going somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It does not get more direct than that. So how much is Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Seychelles, and other member states of SANBio putting on the table? I know we have a system of co-funding projects that are awarded from our member states, but how much are we transferring to SANBio to support its activities? Any takers?
Well, I'll talk about the Botswana case. Well, as I did indicate, currently we are trying to put structures in place whereby if we have to contribute to, say, a pool of funds without any specific project, then there's a mechanism for doing that from Botswana. But currently, we are doing it through projects. I have a project that we are doing with CSIR, for example, which started off funded by SANBio, whereby we were contributing our little bit into it. CSIR was contributing a bit. We've now escalated that project to a flagship project in the region. CSIR have pledged what they pledged. DST has indicated how much they want to put into that project. NFTRC has indicated how much we'll be putting into the project. We are still negotiating with our government to see how they can assist us to match what DST is putting on the table. But because we don't have mechanisms as yet, we are still forming them. I know it is going to be a difficult issue to conclude, but I think that's a good initiative to go about it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kibakile. The project that he's referring to is on a nutri-drink that is formulated from indigenous crops. But I think to answer your question, it's an interesting question that as steering group members we need to look into. Currently, projects are co-funded. So if a project from South Africa gets some funding, we're able to co-fund the project. But we need to move to a stage where we put all our funding into the coffers and we really upscale and translate some of the research into commercial product. It's a costly exercise to commercialize, and it's really important that we have a sizable pool of resources. I see your question. We'll come back to you. Let's just now give Madam Bell an opportunity to say a few words. Thanks.
Okay. There we are. Okay, so Seychelles consists of 115 islands. And we're located, some of you might know where we are, some of you might not. We are located just northeast of Madagascar. And basically, our islands are uninhabited, so it's more of conservation and reserves. Our total land mass is only 460 km squared compared to our waters, which is huge, 1,374,000. Seychelles, that's our population, only 93,000 people. And it's the smallest population in Africa. Our main industry is tourism and fishing. And as I said, 45% of its territory is under conservation. So this is a brief background on NISTI, where I work. NISTI, it's fairly new, enacted in 2014. I just joined last year. So it was enacted to harmonize the development of science, technology, and innovation across all our sectors and programs. It is an autonomous body. It's directly under the Vice President, which is a big supporter for STI across all our sectors. That's our mandate, to provide leadership and coordination for research and promotion of STI. And that the vision of the institution, harness STI and transform Seychelles from economic efficient-driven to a more knowledge-based economy. And currently, our priorities for us at our institution is basically to establish our business technology and innovation incubator, which is currently at cabinet level. So hopefully by this year, we will start it up. And also our NRF and NIS and National Open Access Data Management System. This is where it gets a bit tricky, because Seychelles, we don't have a resource mobilization model as of late. So I will try and explain how our funding mechanism work. So basically, funding for all MDAs, which is ministries, departments, and agencies, are based on program performance-based budgeting and medium-term expenditure strategy, PBB and MTES. It's a lot, yeah. So all MDAs will fill in their MTES at the start of the year, and they will basically put in their priorities and their challenges. These priorities especially has to align with the national priority areas of our country. Then the funds will get allocated by the government through our Ministry of Finance, Trade, and Economic Planning at the Economic Planning section. And as I said, it has to align with national priority. Yes, so the MDAs, when they fill in the MTES with their priorities, they will basically have a baseline projection for 3 years of how much they believe that these priorities will cost them. Then, when they fill that up, it will go to the Ministry of Finance, which will give an indicative ceiling, basically a rough calculation of how much funds that will, how much it will cost that priority. And then, for example, us at NISTI, this year we want to establish our NRF. Let's say we fill in our MTES, we say that it will cost us, let's say 5 million Seychelles rupees for 2018 to establish that. It will go to the Ministry of Finance, which will calculate more or less if that is possible or not. And then when this is done, it will go higher up to the cabinet. Yep. It will go higher up to the cabinet, which will analyze these priorities for all the MDAs to decide which priority in the MTES that they will actually give funding to. And then finally, this will go to the National Assembly of Seychelles. They will have the final say of how much money they will allocate, how much funding they will release to those MDAs. Okay? A bit about our external funding sources. We get a lot of funds externally from European Union, SANBio, ADB, UNESCO. UNESCO actually helped fund our launching of our SDI policy last year, which was really successful. World Bank, USAID, they are actually in a process right now where they have teamed up with local NGOs, where they have helped in funding coral restoration in Seychelles. This meaning that in the 1990s, we lost most of our corals and marine ecosystem through coral bleaching. So they put forward a project whereby they take certain coral colonies from areas, and then they transport it to the areas where it's degraded, and then they actually help to restore the degraded areas. And then, so we don't know actually how much funding we raised to date. That's quite a mystery for us, but we know in which activities, in which bioscience activities that we do. For example, SBS is Seychelles Bureau of Standards. They are doing research right now in medicinal plants of Seychelles. SFA, which is the Seychelles Fishing Authority, they are especially interested in research in marine sciences and fishery science. SA is our agricultural agency, and the Blue Economy and the Ministry of Health as well. So our plan to sustain funding, basically still strengthen our regional and international partners at the collaboration, bilateral, multilaterals, successful implementation of policies, for example, our NEPAD policy, support and promote research in biosciences, and then the innovative funding mechanism is quite interesting, the Blue Bond. Blue Bond for Blue Economy is actually, by buying bonds, it will help fund our marine spatial plan, which will then go to the protection of our waters. And then the debt swap. Actually, the debt swap as well is for environmental conservation program. This, our country is in process of creating 2 huge new marine parks in return for a large amount of our national debt being written off. So basically, there's 2 new protected areas, and the swap deal is about 22 million of our national debt owed to the UK and Belgium and France has been bought off by an NGO called Nature Conservancy. They assist Seychelles a lot, and they have actually freed up to 12 million for the next 20 years so that it can go to our protection of our waters and conservation. So it's a huge deal, actually. So that's it for us. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bell. I think your presentation did raise some of interesting issues around how you raise the funding. The blue bonds for the blue economy, I think that's one interesting way, but most importantly also is that your agencies get funding based on performance. So that's good to know that you do well, you get some funding from your treasury. Can we now get questions from the floor? You are researchers, perhaps where you are from a government department and you would like to get more funding from SANBio, from your own home country's government. What questions do you have for our panelists? I see 2 hands. There's a gentleman at the back. I see there's also a gentleman here in front. Can I get a sense of who else would, I see you, madam, in front. There's 2 ladies in front here. So whoever's got the mic, let's start with you. Please indicate where you're from, and then you can state your question.
My name is Vincent Kumwenda. I'm from Malawi. I wanted to find out how we're doing in terms of equity from the commercialization of research outputs. I don't know how we're doing like in different countries. I know in UK there's a debate now that universities are taking like 10% from like some of the outputs that are commercialized. With all this talk of we promoting entrepreneurship, one would expect that universities will get a lot of funding from getting equity from maybe commercialization of outputs. I just wanted to find out from the panelists how we're doing.
Thank you very much. So what rate of our research is commercialized? 10% from the UK? How much from your home countries? And perhaps Dr. Chakaunya can give us a sense of how much of SANBio funded projects get commercialized. Madam?
This is for those countries that have SANBio projects. I know Seychelles doesn't have at the moment. Well, this has been a very generous program, and it's been going on for quite a few years. But have your respective governments and institutions planned as to what happens once the SANBio program comes to an end? I mean, how do you see the sustainability of your various projects at the end of the program?
Very good question. What happens when SANBio projects come to an end? After they get funded, the researcher in your country, is there a mechanism that a country can help that project to move forward? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, thank you. I'm Dr. Masipa, 4 years retiree from the University of Venda in Limpopo province. I'm interested in being informed as to whether in the funding which you have received, as to whether the physical infrastructure funding is also inclusive. Why I'm asking this question is because you find that with some funders, they indicate that the funding only goes for the activity of research, but without a physical infrastructure. So this takes me also to find out from Seychelles as to what are the engagements of the NGOs. Are the engagements scientific related or what? And I'm also interested in knowing the number of islands because you have just said that it consists, Seychelles consists of islands. So I'm inquisitive in knowing the number of islands. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very interesting questions. So in case you'd like to visit Seychelles, how many islands are there? But I think most importantly also, who funds the infrastructure? If SANBio funds the research activity, who then funds the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure? There was a question at the back. Yes, sir? We'll take those for now, and then we'll take responses from the panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. My name is Philip Iya. I am from the I am from the IKS Center of Northwest University, Mafikeng campus. From the reports, it is evident that governments are really committed to funding research. But my problem is, as reported here, that they direct their funding to strategic research, to priority research. I would like to request the panel to unpack what is strategic, what is priority. I got a few examples here of the youth being taken as priority. For example, how much is IKS given as a priority area, if at all? So please, let's unpack this strategic, this priority. For example, do we consider women being given funds as a priority area? Do we give IKS a priority area? I know in South Africa, IKS took a very strategic position when the IKS policy was introduced in 2004. And after that, a lot of other activities followed. So there is evidence of IKS being given a priority status. What else should governments consider as priority? Maybe the panel can unpack for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll take those questions for now, just perhaps to rehash the questions. You can pick one or two of the questions. The rate of commercializing research outputs, either at the country level or from a SANBio research funded initiatives. What is the role then of member states funding research that has been SANBio funded? What happens after SANBio? Physical infrastructure, who funds that? From Seychelles, how do you engage with your NGOs? What is strategic? When you say strategic priority areas, what do you mean? Do we speak about IKS of women as a priority? And of course, how many islands are there in Seychelles? You can pick and choose which questions you'd like to respond to.
Okay, we have 115, so 115 islands that consist of Seychelles. Most of it is uninhabited because it's coralline islands. But we have mainly 3 big islands that's inhabited. So that's, I live on the big island. So, and the role of our NGOs, most of our NGOs are environmental based, so they are very, very big on environmental conservation, both land and marine based. So that's, so they will get external funding from other NGOs internationally to fund the conservation project on all the islands.
I know when we visited Seychelles a year or so ago, we met with all of the departments and agencies, and the civil society was very disturbed because there was no time to engage with civil society. So we ended up having a special session with civil society, and that is a good thing for Seychelles. Shall we respond to the rest of the questions?
Okay, thank you. I think I'll try to pick a few questions, trying to say it in the Zambian setup. Hope I got the question correct on R&D outputs coming from universities. Yeah, I think there is, like in the case of Zambia, we have identified that we, of course, from universities, as the mandate is for universities, as much as there is academic, we expect R&D products. So the fund which I highlighted, like under the technology business, development fund, actually it is for such a purpose. And it's actually annually it is being advertised, whereby so anyone from any university with any R&D outputs is free to access that fund. So actually the onus now remains on the scientists to take advantage of that fund. Of course, the physical infrastructure, like most of the funds, the ones like Strategic Research Fund, besides supporting the project development, actually it also supports the procurement of equipment, and in addition it also supports the development of human capital, at a postgraduate level. So that is also, I think, taken care of within the fund. Yeah, I think there's the question on to unpack what priority areas are. Yes. Of course, like in the Zambian setup, when you say priority areas, as much as people from government understand normally what governments go through, since most of the control of any government is under some political setup, so normally the priority areas, they are aligned to say what the politicians want. For instance, they want to see like whatever, our research we're doing, let it reach the people. So if there are diseases, for instance, okay, recently in Zambia, I know it was on news, there was the issue of cholera, reaching the, affecting the country. So if we can have, innovations in such fields, so that stands out as being priority for Zambia. And also issues of like development of traditional medicines, which in most countries, including Zambia, that hasn't been developed. Actually, that also for Zambia, we have taken it as a priority area, which government puts in money. And I highlighted a good example of the sondage formula, which SANBio also has been, helping to support. Government is also up in arms to support that project, to make sure that it reaches the market. I think those are the few comments I can give. Thanks.
I'm just responding to about 3 questions. Strategic research, what is strategic research, and so on. From the Zimbabwean context, we have got the Research Council of Zimbabwe. It's an apex council whose mandate is to identify specific research areas which answers national problems and interests. They've got clusters, social cluster to answer questions related to social cluster, environmental, science, technology, engineering to address specific issues under those clusters. And normally, their knowledge is guided by ZAS, Zimbabwe Academy of Sciences, and they tap from that and come up with national priority areas. Then, to further illustrate that, universities in Zimbabwe have got 15 now. They are set, and each university has got its own specific mandate. For instance, Chinhoyi University of Technology is a technology university with a defined thrust as a university. Biotechnology Research Training Institute means their preoccupation is biotechnology and the training that buttresses and fortifies that. NAST, National University of Science and Technology, they've got a specific mandate as outlined by their regulations and so on. Then on infrastructure, I think Eric would answer the question from SANBio's side, but rarely infrastructure projects are funded through such arrangements. But in Zimbabwe, we have flighted infrastructural bonds where our universities and banks, financial institutions enter into agreements to set up infrastructure. And of course, they will realize the potential of their investment in a long-term kind of fashion. Then we also have international financiers, multilateral funding, like JICA. I think they also come in to assist and so on. So that's the situation as it obtains in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Let me try and attempt 2 questions. Research outputs, how are we doing? If I may restrict myself to the SANBio projects, research outputs that we have been involved in, I would say we gave an example of the Nutri-Drink, which we believe we've come up with a number of formulations, two prototypes as we speak. The reason why we are saying we are making this a flagship project now is because we want to upscale production of these prototypes such that we can see them in the retail markets. We want to go beyond South Africa and Botswana and see similar kind of projects or products in Lesotho, in Angola, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, produced from ingredients or base materials found in those countries, but serving similar kind of objectives that we've set for these products. So we are doing quite well in that respect, in that we've actually moved a step forward. Already we are mobilizing for funds. The project proposal is ready. The higher principals have given them blessings. So it's just a question of now starting to implement as soon as we get the funding from, I think what is delaying right now is my government, because we're still engaging. As I said, we don't have a mechanism as yet for the government to top up what NAFTEC is putting across. But that is what we want to see happening, commercializing these products, serving the purpose that we want them to serve. What happens once SANBio comes to an end? You know, when I first came to know about SANBio in 2012, there were so few people in a gathering like this. There were so few project outputs as we are seeing them out here. So that is an indication that we've really gone a step forward as a region to really uplift our landscape in terms of research. And for us to think of regressing, I think we should fight so hard that we don't go back there. Because we said when we started, we want to see SANBio improving the RSTI landscape in the region. And therefore, we should do our level best to see to it that it doesn't regress. So I never think of it stopping, Madam.
Yeah, thank you very much, fellow panelists, for very insightful remarks. Before I conclude, perhaps, Eric, you can help us on the question of the rate of projects that are commercialized from the SANBio pool. As the mic makes its way to you, I think, colleagues, this session has taught us one or two things. One, know who your government representative is, so that if you have any ideas of how they can help you mobilize funding, you know who to speak to. We have only 4 or 5 with myself now, but the others in the audience, find them and talk to them about how they can support research. I think it's also encouraging that a number of countries that spoke today have got national innovation funding schemes, which will fund SANBio projects that are no longer SANBio funded. So you're not just saying SANBio will come to an end, but when a project has gone through the SANBio process, are there mechanisms at the country level to support those research initiatives? The steering committee has a lot to do. I know this is an agenda item for Thursday, but we need to talk about innovative ideas to mobilize resources, whether nodes have business plans, whether we have blue bonds, whether we collaborate with multinationals and the private sector. Those are some of the issues that we'll discuss on Thursday in the steering committee. So what is the rate of commercialization, Eric?
Let me come in the light, because what I'm going to say might not be very... So SANBio is part of NEPAD. NEPAD does an innovation survey. It does R&D surveys. So I think in the morning I mentioned the evidence of does our R&D lead to products on the market, at least in our system, except for 1 or 2 countries in the continent. So I think Egypt and South Africa would be outliers. Actually, from universities, there is very little evidence that I know. And how do I know this? It's because the universities are not making money from products. You look at the royalties. But from organizations like CSIR, yes, there is evidence. I think if you look at the annual report for CSIR, there is almost, I think every year, more than 1 million or so from royalties, which is from the IP that they generated. But from the investors, definitely no. And the reason is very simple. R&D means research and experimental development. Universities do research, but very few have infrastructure to do experimental development. So they do research and generate the products, which is publications. But the publications, because of infrastructure gap, they might not end up being developed in something that solves the problem that's the need that's in the society. And but unfortunately, most of our researchers in the continent are in higher education and public institutions. So that's kind of the challenge that we have. But that's why SANBio is looking at commercialization. And I think my colleagues here and them, and Maria and them would also attest to that. So one of the requirements for SANBio projects was you need to have an industry partner. And the reason is simply want to pull the technology, the innovation, or the invention out of the university into the hands of someone who talks to the people on the market. But that's the most difficult thing we have been experiencing, because generally academia and industry in most countries, we still have to work a bit more, and there are a lot of other reasons. So very little. Then who is funding infrastructure? I think Dr. Mfanda is at, we concentrate, we have 13 countries, but governments are funding most of the infrastructure, but at the budget level that they can afford. But we have also partnered with a number of some organizations. I think Seeding Labs is one of those. For those in academia, you know, they donate equipment to different labs. I know University of Zambia, I think Zambia got, the University of Namibia, Luana, UKZN, and there's a session tomorrow, and we're signing an MOU between SANBio and Seeding Labs. So this is a partnership to look at how do we get infrastructure from companies that are making these. They donate it, Seeding Labs also, and other organizations also make it available developing countries. But the MOU we're signing with them is that equipment is not being used either. That's where the problem is. So how do we work together so that those that don't have can also access the equipment, and we can also agree on how do we maintain the equipment so that the host doesn't suffer from repairing equipment when we have used it. So at the cocktail we'll sign that, but I think we'll talk about those a bit more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chakaunya. I think the message is clear that even with all of these funding instruments, there's a whole lot more that we need to do. Commercialization is an expensive exercise, and if universities are to make money, it starts here with the colleagues on the panel. So can we give them a round of applause as we close the session?